Hey everyone, back again. Today I want to tell you about Adrienne Rich's notion of compulsory heterosexuality from her essay titled Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence from the good old year 1980. But before jumping into it, hi, I'm David. I explain philosophical concepts and ideas and ways to make them accessible to you. So if you're new here, you can subscribe and see videos I release once a week, once every 2 weeks, we'll see. You can find this as a podcast if you found this on YouTube, where you can just get the audio. If you found this as a podcast, you can find it on YouTube, or sometimes it's in video form. Isn't that fun? If you want to follow me in any other platform, you can find links for such things in the description. Consider donating to one of the organizations below, please, to help Palestinians, Lebanese in need right now. That would be really great. If you want more about that, I've covered a number of texts explaining Israel's apartheid regime and exactly what has been going on there for the past 75 years. So go check those out if you're interested more in that history. But for now, let me just explain the term compulsory heterosexuality as an important keyword in the history of philosophy. At least I think. If you want more on this text alone, I've covered it. Just type in Adrienne Rich, compulsory heterosexuality, and chances are you'll find my explanation for it as either a podcast or YouTube video or whatever. You can go check that out. But today I'm just going to explain the term because it has far-reaching implications. And it's something that I think is a term that when students mostly hear, it's like a click moment in their minds where they're like, oh, hadn't really thought of it that way. So I'm hoping I can do that with some of you, but I'm also interested in how many of you see this playing out. How does compulsory heterosexuality affect you in your day-to-day lives? In what ways is it policed? Is it disciplined into people? Now, just to start out, just as her essay does, Adrienne Rich developed this term not only to respond to patriarchal power and men's power over women, but she was also responding to the feminist movement in the 70s, 60s, and 70s that didn't really represent the experiences of lesbian women. That is, many feminists who were fighting against patriarchal power assumed that heterosexuality was natural and normal. And by doing that, they excluded and ostracized lesbian women from actually really having a representative voice in the popular feminist movement. Now, Adrienne Rich is just trying to decouple this association between feminism and between heterosexuality, to not only say that lesbian existence is something that is also natural, something that can also be normal with the right social conditions, but it presents a fundamental challenge to patriarchal authority. Now, her point is not to say that it is a political identity, it's not, but that it can have this effect. And so she offers the term lesbian existence to oppose compulsory heterosexuality because she wants to think about lesbian existence beyond the narrow association with sexual couplings, like in the case of lesbians. So she offers the terms lesbian existence and lesbian continuum to think about the entire spectrum of largely women relationships with one another in romantic and platonic and other kinds of intimate ways that breaks down many of the enforced beliefs, the enforced practices within patriarchy that often do the work, or that often does the work of separating women, taking them apart from one another, divide and conquer, so to speak. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. What is the thing they're opposing? What is compulsory heterosexuality? Well, simply, it is the idea for Adrienne Rich that heterosexuality is not necessarily what people naturally gravitate to, but is rather something that is socially and culturally ingrained into people and is actually encouraged and is actually disciplined into people from a very young age. And one of the examples I like to give to my students to help them kind of think about how strange compulsory heterosexuality really is, I ask them to think in their lives, and I'm going to ask you, think in your own life, how many of you have most of your most intimate, personal, close friendships are with people of the same gender that you identify with? And most people in the West here tend to say, yeah, most of my close, intimate friendships are with someone who is of the same gender as I am. Yet compulsory heterosexuality dictates that actually we're going to ignore that, and you have to choose the one person to live with, to raise children with, and so on has to be of another gender. Which is kind of strange. I mean, like, it seems as though, as humans, we, just by the evidence of most people having most friends of the same gender, maybe the evidence suggests that we gravitate towards those kinds of couplings. Now, my point is not to say that there's like an actually natural way for people to orient themselves in the world. That's not what I'm saying at all. But even given this socio-romantic dynamic that I'm describing, it seems as though heterosexuality really isn't even what people gravitate towards. And it actually depends upon repeated disciplining. And this begins even before you're born. If you're born in the West, chances are, even before you exist, you've been given a name. And that name is probably from your father's line, if you have a father. And so even before you're born, you've been inscribed into a patriarchal order. You might think, oh, it's just a name, whatever, who cares? But I really put this to you. Imagine a heterosexual dynamic and a woman asks her spouse, oh, well, maybe let's name the child after me instead of you, and you can watch the dude short circuit and him not being able to comprehend that possibility. But it's as arbitrary to choose his last name versus her last name in a cis-het dynamic like that. And it goes to show just how much, like, even the tiniest things, like the name you're given, inscribes people within a patriarchal order. And this patriarchal order is one that relies upon the continued subjugation of women. Not only of women, but of non-heterosexual forms of romantic and platonic couplings. And this plays out in so many different ways. I mean, if a man and a woman are just out for lunch together, many people interpret that as though they are on a date with one another. And your family and friends might be like, oh, well, what are you doing with this person? As though it's impossible for, in this case, a man and a woman to just be friends and to actually have things in common that they discuss, just because of the highly ordered and gendered way that our world has been divided. The only way they're supposed to meet is within this romantic relationship that is highly bureaucratized by the state. It is highly organized by religion and religious authority, and it is encouraged socio and culturally from the moment you're born, being inscribed with either blue-colored things versus pink-colored things, always pointing to, apparently, another gender as what is supposed to be the person, or who's supposed to be the person you spend your life with. And the heterosexual argument here is to say, like, well, okay, humanity's one fundamental task is child rearing. Now, if we just assume that that is the case, which we shouldn't, I mean, to have children is not for everyone, and to have children, it shouldn't be mandated. I mean, that's a type of government control that I don't think anyone wants. Maybe some people want it, but I don't think any reasonable person would want that kind of government control. But in any case, even if we assume that, let us just assume that having children is somehow hardwired into us. There's nothing about that that states that after you have children, that you must raise that child in a house with someone of another gender. You can have children with someone and then raise that children with maybe your friends. Why couldn't that work? Well, it's just because our world is structured in such a way where the benefits are only afforded to those kinds of couples, cis-het, within the cis-het matrix. Anything that falls outside of that isn't recognized by the state, by religious authorities, by family and friends, which goes to show that if heterosexuality was truly natural, why do we have all of these institutions policing it and making sure that it does in fact happen that way? If it was just natural, then people should just gravitate to it on their own. But that's not really what people do. People are actually a lot more complicated. Lesbian couples tend to be the happiest of all romantic couples. So what's really going on there? Now, all of this isn't really even considering so far, like the actual material violence that women largely experience, let alone other gender and sexual minorities in the West, that women experience day to day because of the enforcement of heterosexuality that assumes that a woman must live with a man in this context, which is just a breeding ground for so much violence. So much violence, the denial of pleasure, the lack of actual communication, all comes about because compulsory heterosexuality, in its being baked into so many institutions, comes to occupy the dominant life script. And when something comes to occupy the dominant life script, it makes it really hard to oppose it. And so heterosexuality then is framed in such a way as you aren't even encouraged to ask questions about it. You aren't even encouraged to set boundaries or to think about the different ways that that heterosexuality might look to you. Varying degrees of monogamy, let alone sexual relationships, let alone anything like that, that problematizes the idea that it's just this one size fits all thing. But the dominant life script wants to make it so. And when you deny people the opportunity to actually discuss things like consent, like preferences, like anything like that, in favor of just doing the heterosexual life script that happens to benefit men at all levels, from the political to the industrial to the sexual to the social and so on, as long as these things are baked into all of these institutions and these beliefs are baked into these institutions, it cultivates a culture of silence where it's very difficult to oppose it unless you want to be institutionalized or you want people to look down on you or to mark you as there being something wrong with you. And that's really one of the dangers of the compulsory nature of heterosexuality, beyond like just the day-to-day repression that it assumes. It cultivates violence against women. And there's so much that we can add to this term as well. Others have considered how it's not really just compulsory heterosexuality, but it's white compulsory heterosexuality, where white people, white hetero people are not only encouraged to pursue someone of another gender, they're encouraged to pursue people of the same race as themselves, which opens up a whole other racial can of worms. There's also compulsory monogamy, as though it's impossible to think about sexual romantic relationships in any other ways besides the monogamous heterosexual life script. There's compulsory cisgenderism, as though the only people you can identify as belonging to another gender than your own must be those that have been designated as such at birth, which is, I mean, what emphasis to place on a single moment in someone's life as to how they can determine to exist in the world and how they should be perceived. And these are all just part of patriarchy, of sexism, of compulsory heterosexuality that works to repress mostly women and other gender and sexual minorities. But yeah, let me know, in what other ways is it policed? In what other ways is it encouraged that are evidence of the fact that it's not natural, that it's actually trained into people, disciplined into them? And what other ways does it actually manifest in people's lives? On that note, if you like what I did, consider donating to one of the organizations below, and you can hit all the buttons. And on that note, take care.